Dubey sir, you can unmute and introduce guest speaker.
Okay. Good morning, friends. Our speaker this morning is Professor Hilary Rodrigues. Many of us would know him because he has been a speaker in this circle before. But for those who are joining for the first time, Professor Hilary Rodrigues is going to talk to us on embracing the unknown, the perspectives of J. Krishnamurti and others. I'll briefly introduce Professor Rodrigues. He is a professor of religious studies at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada. He specializes in Eastern religion and philosophy, as the author of several books and articles on Hinduism, the goddess Durga, and on the academic study of religion. He has also written books and articles on Krishnamurti and once taught at a Krishnamurti school in Canada. His talk today is not an academic presentation, but a deep inquiry into Krishnamurti's teachings vis-a-vis the modern non-dual spiritual movement. Professor Rodrigues will look at case teachings along with Vedanta and Buddhism and modern teachers such as Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj and even Eckhart Tolle and Rupert Spira, and compare and contrast these with case approach of what is regarded to be Krishnamurti's key teachings and insight and psychological transformation. With these words, I want to extend a very warm welcome to Professor Hilary Rodrigues, and also want to thank him on behalf of the Indore Study Circle for accepting our invitation and being with us today. So Hilary, you can take as long as you want and leave about 20-25 minutes for people to express their opinion and ask questions. So over to Professor Hilary Rodrigues. Thank you.
Thank you, Shripati, for organizing the event. I was unable to accommodate earlier requests to present something, so I'm glad that I can finally do so. I wonder if everybody can hear me clearly. I'm using my computer microphone. Am I clear enough?
Yes, yes.
Excellent. So officially, as of June 30th of this year, I officially retired from my position at the U of L, but I will continue my affiliation with the University of Lethbridge as Professor Emeritus with emeritus status. But my time is my own. I don't have to prepare for classes and other such things now. So my focus today is on the topic of the unknown, both in Krishnamurti's teachings, but also based on my own understanding of it, or lack of understanding of it. I'm hoping that the brief presentation will trigger some questions and contributions from you so we can have a meaningful discussion after my presentation. I also want to remind you that I'm not here to present myself as an authority on Krishnamurti or to be an official interpreter of his teachings. What I present is based on my academic study of Krishnamurti's teachings, but also derived from my own realizations. Krishnamurti urged us to discover things for ourselves. And so I feel that the true spirit of a Krishnamurti group should be to discuss our own discoveries, using his words as touchstones, rather than to try to intellectually understand Krishnamurti comprehensively, unless you're engaged in an academic study of him. And I know many of you here actually are academics and are engaged in kind of an academic study of Krishnamurti. I don't think anybody here attending is a novice or a beginner when it comes to Krishnamurti. So most of you probably know that the unknown is a very important feature of K's taught in K's teachings. I would wager to say that almost everything he said in his teachings was a pointer to the unknown. In a discussion in 1963 to a group in Gstaad, Switzerland, he said quite bluntly, and I quote, "You must take a complete jump into the unknown," end quote. I mean, that's pretty straightforward when it comes to him and how important he thinks the unknown is or was. We also know, of course, that there's a Krishnamurti book entitled Freedom from the Known. And so Krishnamurti was obviously pointing us away from the known so that we might abide in the unknown. But what is it that keeps us firmly within the realm of the known? To Krishnamurti, it's thought. He says, and I quote, and I will use many quotes from Kate, quote, "Addiction to knowledge is like any other addiction. It offers an escape from the fear of emptiness, of loneliness, of frustration, the fear of being nothing. The light of knowledge is a delicate covering under which lies a darkness that the mind cannot penetrate. The mind is frightened of this unknown. So it escapes into knowledge, into theories, hopes, imagination. And this very knowledge is a hindrance to the understanding of the unknown." End quote. So clearly, to Krishnamurti, fear of the unknown is one of the factors that keeps us attached to the known, to knowledge. Even if we intellectually grasp that the known prevents us from fully embracing the unknown, we cannot seem to be able to shake that addiction. So much of what people who are seekers do in order to attain spiritual freedom or liberation consists of the very things that Krishnamurti rejects. For example, most seekers engage in various types of spiritual disciplines, such as yoga, breath work, various types of meditation. They may renounce worldly things and choose a detached way of life. They may pray or practice various worship rituals, fasts, vrats, pujas, and so on. They may try to live a virtuous life of not accumulating material possessions, not stealing, not lying, being nonviolent, not engaging in inappropriate sex, and so on. Now, these may be fine practices to become healthy, socially responsible, and to live ethical lives. But to Krishnamurti, they are not conducive to the radical psychological awakening to which he points.
House number 106, road number 180.
He says, quote, "Disciplines, renunciations, detachment, rituals, the practice of virtue, all these, however noble, are the process of thought. And thought can only work towards an end, towards an achievement, which is ever the known," end quote. So it's important to recognize that the unknown is not something unusual or remote. It's always here. Just as a fish swims in the ocean, we are swimming in the unknown. Even this fish analogy is inadequate because we're not just surrounded by the unknown, We are the unknown. In other words, the unknown is the very essence of what is, our existence. Thinking, thought, and the knowledge that derives from thought is like a thin veneer that overlays the unknown. Look at how Krishnamurti puts it. Again, another quote. Knowledge is a flash of light between two darknesses. But knowledge cannot go above and beyond the darkness. Knowledge is essential to technique, as coal is to the engine, but it cannot reach out into the unknown. The unknown is not to be caught in the net of the known. Knowledge must be set aside for the unknown to be. But how difficult that is, end quote. It's very interesting that Krishnamurti points out the challenge that's involved in letting go of the known, even though it is this very small and flimsy little thing in his, using his analogy, that overlays, or like a flash of light that separates darkness on either side. Now, Krishnamurti was not the first person to talk about this, about the limitations of thought and the sorrow that it ultimately causes us. Yes, I said sorrow because although we think that thought and knowledge help to make our lives better, they actually do not at the psychological existential level. Thought and knowledge have helped us to develop the technology that allows us to Zoom instantaneously with each other halfway around the world, as we're doing right now. One would be a fool to think that thought and knowledge aren't powerful tools and capacities through which we as human beings have learned to confront our fears. From fire to artificial intelligence, we have created powerful instruments for personal and collective empowerment. But we are cautioned against misunderstanding the power of this thinking in the search for self-realization. The ancient Isha Upanishad, composed perhaps as early as 500 BCE, it has this seemingly puzzling verse, and I give it to you in translation. It's verse number 9. Into blinding darkness enter those who adore ignorance. But into yet greater darkness enter those preoccupied with knowledge. Now, it may seem obvious to say that if you adore ignorance, you enter into blinding darkness. But the Upanishad also says that being preoccupied with knowledge plunges you into even greater darkness. Now think of how most people who place such a high value on knowledge and learning, like an academic like myself at university, we market and promote the acquisition of knowledge and so on. They would think that statement is quite bizarre. Now, if you're familiar with Krishnamurti and other teachings, let's say mystical teachings of the Upanishads, you're familiar with this critique of preoccupation with knowledge. And the critique of preoccupation would not be thought of as unusual or radical to you. Notice that the Upanishad is rather interesting and nuanced. It says the critique is not of knowledge, but preoccupation with knowledge. That means knowledge has its proper place, but it becomes problematic when it becomes the central focus of our lives. This is consistent with, again, what Krishnamurti says. Again, I quote him here, quote, knowledge is essential to function, to go to the factory, to write a letter, anything, knowledge is necessary. So, can the mind see the fact that knowledge is necessary, and yet realize or see the truth that as long as it lives there, it will everlastingly suffer because it is based on thought. See the truth of it, and then can the mind realize its value as knowledge and not be a slave to it, end quote. Now, if we return to the Isha Upanishad, it goes on to say in verse 10 that absolute reality is other than or different from the known. So that's fine. That's just repeating this idea that absolute reality is different than the known, somehow tied to the unknown. This is quite consistent with what Krishnamurti said 2,500 years later. But then the Isha Upanishad says something even more enigmatic. And this is what I'd like to focus on for the remainder of our talk. It says in verse 10, absolute reality, they say, is different from the unknown. Thus we have heard it explained to us by the wise. Different from the known, different from the unknown. Thus we have heard it explained to us by the wise. Now, you may have been content to think, oh yes, I'm focused on thought and thinking, that's the known, I need to get into the unknown and so on. And here, this ancient Upanishad is saying, oh, well, it's not even that, it's not even the unknown. It's different from both the known and the unknown. So, is Krishnamurti saying something different from the Upanishad? So in other words, does the Upanishad contradict what K's teachings are, and so on? What exactly is being gotten at here? And like I said, I'm hoping that we will be able to explore this issue in our discussion a little further. To kind of provide more context to this, I'll talk a bit about Shankara and the Buddhism and so on. Now, when people read these Upanishads, or they read the teachings of Shankara and Buddhism or Krishnamurti, many are just confused. I have friends who read Krishnamurti and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't understand him at all. When they read the old Upanishads, they dismiss their value and they just continue in their normal conditioned lives. But for a few people who read these texts and who become seekers, the teachings cause them to reflect on the way their minds function. And when they do, they may become highly aware of their suffering and begin to recognize that this suffering is primarily due to the nature of their minds. This miserable state of confusion and inner conflict is called conditioned mind by Krishnamurti, samsara by Hindus and Buddhist teachers. And many of you may belong to the category of seekers, or some of you may be finders. But seekers typically begin to seek a solution to the problem of conditioning and to be free from this state of inner confusion and conflict. And Krishnamurti talks about this as a freedom from psychological conditioning. The Hindus call it moksha, or spiritual liberation. The Buddhists call it nirvana, the snuffing out of all ignorance. And they all talk about the ineffable, unknowable nature of that state of liberation. To Advaita Hindus, non-dual Hindus, such as Shankara, it's absolute Brahman, Brahman without any attributes, nirguna. And to the Buddhists, it's sometimes framed as emptiness, shunyata. And Krishnamurti calls it the unknown. So we could argue that maybe they mean something slightly different in these cases and so on. But for the sake of moving our discussion along, let's say that they are similar terms pointing to some similar ineffable absolute truth or reality. But of course, because of the habits of our minds, we've been conditioned to try to figure things out. So most seekers, when they hear that they are in a state of conditioning or spiritual ignorance, try to get to a state of freedom, the so-called radical psychological transformation. And this leads us on a journey to cleanse and purify the body and the mind to attain that desired state. Maybe I'm repeating myself here, but we may do something like adopt a good diet, maybe a vegetarian one, embark on an exercise regimen to gain the energy, maybe practice yoga, engage in some sort of meditative practice, mindfulness, or choiceless awareness. We may speak extra slowly, try to listen more, because listening is so important. We may try to cultivate the demeanor of a sage, a sagely person. We might look at how other people who we think are self-realized, how did they live? And we may try to mimic their way of being. How did Krishnamurti live? How did he talk? What did he eat? What exercises did he do? And so on. All the while we are thinking and hoping as seekers that these behaviors will bring us closer to the goal of self-realization. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as closer to the goal. All the masters tell us that. None of these things will do the trick. The confusion arises because the same masters seem to point us to methods for attaining the goal of realization. So, in one hand, they're telling us, no, it's here now, there's nothing. And then they're like, okay, so Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras has the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs of yoga. Buddhism has the Noble Eightfold Path. And ultimately, Krishnamurti tells us there's no path to truth, and that there must be freedom at the beginning, not as a goal at the end. So Gaudapada, one of the root teachers of Shankara, we don't know if he was an immediate teacher or his teacher's teacher and so on, but he said this, so quoting Gaudapada from Mandukya Karikas, quote, all beings are ever free from bondage and pure by nature. They are ever illumined and liberated from the very beginning. Still, the wise speak of the beings as capable of knowing. You see this tricky, seeming paradoxical reality of what teachers do. At one point, they're telling you you're already it, and then another point, they're telling you you're capable of getting it, and so on. So the gist of what Gaudapada is saying is that there's only one absolute reality, Brahman, and since everything is Brahman, there's no individual being that needs to be liberated. Brahman is always intrinsically free. And the language of these teachers still talk about beings who are not liberated and capable of gaining liberation and so on. But at the core, there's really no need to do anything than to be what one is, according to these teachings. So that's the paradox or puzzle that perhaps we can explore in our conversation and discussion. One is already intrinsically free, yet there's teachings about people in bondage and teachings on how to gain liberation. Now, you may think that this kind of teaching is only found in Gaudapada and and Shankara, about who talk, a non-dual Vedanta, which talks about one indivisible absolute reality. But it's really also found in Buddhism. So, for instance, one of the most popular sutras that is recited by tens of millions of Buddhists every day is the Heart Sutra. Many of you may be familiar with it. It's a very concise presentation of some of the key notions of Buddhism. Now, many Buddhists just repeat it and chant it like a mantra, but it contains really pretty extraordinary teachings on wisdom, even though it's used devotionally. Now, if you recall, some of you maybe know, most of you probably know, that Buddhism is based on the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. The first truth is the reality of dukkha, suffering. And the second noble truth is that there's a cause to suffering, tied to grasping, based on ignorance, desire. And the third noble truth is that there's a possibility of actually ending your suffering or dukkha. And the fourth truth is by following the Noble Eightfold Path. And this leads to the ending of ignorance, the attainment of the perfection of wisdom, prajna paramita. So the Heart Sutra, this very, very concise, you can read it all on one page. It goes on to say, after all of this, it says, there is no wisdom. Neither is there wisdom nor ignorance. There is no ending of wisdom nor ending of ignorance. No attainment of wisdom, no ending of ignorance. So this phrase that the Heart Sutra has is actually a refutation of a very fundamental principle in Buddhism known as pratitya samutpada, conditioned co-production or dependent origination. If you've seen the Tibetan wheel of life, the Bhava Chakra, there's Mara holding this wheel. And on the outer rim of the wheel, there are these different categories, from ignorance leading to grasping, leading to birth and death and cycle and so on of conditioned existence. The Heart Sutra also goes on to so it refutes that scheme of causality, and it also refutes the Four Noble Truths that I had mentioned before. So I quote from it. It says, neither is there suffering, no dukkha, no cause of suffering, no ending of suffering, nor a path leading to the ending of suffering. There is no wisdom nor attainment because there's nothing to grasp. Millions, tens of millions of Buddhists are reciting this every day. At one point believing in the Eightfold Path, but then reciting the scripture that says there's no such thing as any of that. So, in significant way, these teachings, Hindu Vedanta, Buddhism, Krishnamurti, and so on, are undercutting the notion of causality. They're undercutting the notion of time, psychological time. Realization is not an effect. Causality deals with cause and effect. Realization is not an effect that is caused by your efforts and your practices. In fact, every effort that you make is a step away from the unknowable, because it's a movement within the known. Krishnamurti does point us to this when he says, quote, freedom from is an abstraction, but freedom in observing what is and going beyond it is actual freedom. Freedom from something, like freedom from anger, freedom from jealousy, freedom from aggression, is an abstraction and therefore not real. Direct perception is freedom, not the cultivation of the opposite. The cultivation of the opposite implies time, doesn't it? End quote. So, of course, those of us who are familiar with Krishnamurti know that this is one of his classic tropes that he uses. You know, I'm angry, then I think, oh, I shouldn't be angry, and then I'm caught in this inner conflict of wanting freedom from anger and a movement towards that end. And Krishnamurti typically advises us to stay with what is. Even though he talks to us, Krishnamurti talks to us about freedom from the known, he doesn't want us to get so caught up in the unknown that we negate everything. You know, the path of negation is, neti is often used to try and negate the arisings of thought and so on. Krishnamurti is very subtle in what he says, and he's complex. He rejects the notion of complete negation at one level when he says this, and I'll quote him. He says, many people have gone very far, that far, total negation, and that gives you a certain quality of freedom, total negation of everything that thought is constructed, projected, divided, end quote. But then he says, quote, when you negate all that, they haven't solved any of our human deep problems like sorrow, fear, and death. So he's saying the people who do this path of negation and all that and dismiss everything, they haven't really resolved those fundamental issues that still plague us. They have a kind of a hammer with which they go around beating everything, but it isn't necessarily getting at the root issue of those things that actually cause us conflict and turmoil. And then he says this, quote, the desire to free oneself from conditioning only furthers conditioning. But if, instead of trying to suppress desire, one understands the whole process of desire, in that very understanding, there comes freedom from conditioning. If I set about deliberately to free myself from my conditioning, that desire creates its own conditioning. I may destroy one form of conditioning, but I'm caught in another. Whereas, if there is an understanding of desire itself, which includes the desire to be free, then by that very understanding, that very understanding destroys all conditioning. Freedom from conditioning is a byproduct. It's not important. The important thing is to understand what it is that creates conditioning. Sort of interesting, almost seems to contradict what he was saying. You know, we think Krishnamurti is talking about freedom from conditioning and so on. He says, listen, that's just a byproduct. You know, what's important is seeing the very process through which conditioning is created. So in the same vein, it's not necessary to try to end the known in order to enter into the unknown. Coming back full circle now to this business of the known and the unknown. The unknown is simply an idea from within the world of the known. One can only begin where one is, which is the movement of one's own conditioned mind. So one must begin with the known. The conditioned mind, with its petty jealousies, its anger, its violence, and so on, this is what one is. That's the only place one can begin, not in order to enter into the unknown. Because if one does that, this is a movement of desire to try to get somewhere other than the isness of what one is. Start with the known to directly perceive the nature of one's conditioned mind in action. That quality, that requires a sensitive awareness. And that quality of sensitive awareness is only possible when there is freedom. So this is why Krishnamurti tells us, freedom is at the beginning of what you do. It's not a goal to be achieved at the end. The freedom lies in the very readiness of the self to watch what is happening at this very moment. Apart from, in this moment, there is no time. One is not moving in psychological time to some end goal, right? One is working in some sense with the known, not with the unknown. So this is the silent observing mind. Krishnamurti says, and I'm going to have a short talk today. I'll end with a couple of quotes. He says, quote, the silent mind must be as unknown to the mind as the timeless. When the superficial mind is quiet, the deeper mind can offer up its intimations. When the whole consciousness is quiet, silent, and tranquil, free from all becoming, which is spontaneity, then only does the immeasurable come into being. In other words, freedom is possible at this very moment, but we typically do not abide there. And I'll end with this quote. He says, the desire to maintain this freedom that you might experience at this moment if you just dropped everything right now. But the desire to maintain this freedom gives continuity to the memory of the becomer, which is a hindrance to reality. Reality has no continuity. It is from moment to moment, ever new, ever fresh. Reality is not to be spoken of, and when it is no longer reality. This is meditation, end quote. So I will stop there and hope that given us enough fodder with which to have a fruitful discussion going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Hilary. I think it was a very thought-provoking discourse, and you brought in Krishnamurti's teachings and a broader perspective of other religious beliefs like Vedanta and Buddhism. I think I already see 2 hands raised, so we'll take up questions. Yes, Mr. Dinesh Waghmare. Please unmute yourself.
Are you able to listen to me, sir?
Yes, yes.
We can all hear you.
Sir, you said that there is a known and there is unknown. This unknown, basically in Hindu literature, referred as unmanifested. But the actual source is beyond. Actual source is beyond. Even when Krishnamurti says silence, and silence is not, which is absence of noise. So there is a polarity between noise and no noise. But the actual thing is beyond. So even if you have referred even Shankaracharya further says that there are 2, the ultimate has got 2 powers, which is one is creation and another is abstraction, or we can say curtain, or which we can say as a partition. So that partition creates the basically base on which creation takes place. So when we say freedom is at the beginning, So this freedom is available to whom? Is it available to ego? That is my question. If it is available to ego, then there is no issue at all. Everybody would be free. So what remains to be done for ego then? So this is to be questioned. So basically, it is not a, in my view, no contradiction. This your manifested portion is just the extension of the unmanifested. Unmanifested has already been prepared, and that has gone into that has extended to manifested. But the actual creator of this is beyond. So they say that you have to go beyond this. Similarly, they say that whatever you said, there is no freedom, no what with they say bandha. Bandh means what you can say, no your restrictions and all that.
Bondage.
So pardon?
Bondage.
Bondage, sorry, yes, bondage. So when they say that, that is available in non-duality, in source. If that source is reached, then there all these possibilities are there, which you say, all the contradictions are together in that source, available in non-duality. So this is to be seen in a different way, so that all the contradiction which we see, whether Godapart says that or this, they become then one, clear. That beyond there is no everything is there, means that is all in one, we can say. When it comes to the creation and unmanifested and manifested portion, then there is a issue of this duality and all the contradictions. And this contradiction will always remain, means there the polarity of clarity and confusion will always remain in Maya, what they say in Maya. So what are your views on this?
Well, thank you. That was, I mean, I'm not sure I need to say anything beyond what you have said. It's an interesting contribution. You see, I suppose it depends on the perspective of whether you have entered into this unknown absolute, as you said. From that perspective, supposedly everything is clear. The manifest is, in some sense, that which is produced by the unmanifest, or they exist in a relationship to each other, like iceberg forming in the ocean. The manifest is a crystallized water, but it is just water, and it has a form and so on. It dissolves back into the water, it comes back out, and so on. At least these are the ideas that are told to us who exist in, let's say, the unawakened state. If I exist in duality, then all this that you're telling me about the unknown being the truth and so on is just an idea. I don't know it. I'm not, let us say I'm not liberated. If you are liberated, then yes, it all makes sense to you. There's no contradiction. There's the manifest, the unmanifest. There's those in bondage, those who are free. There's really not a contradiction between them. Everybody is actually free. They're all just the absolute, etc., etc. But existentially, the reality is that I am in bondage. I am in suffering. I'm angry. My wife just said something to me, and now I don't know what to do. My kids are there. I'm worried about getting old and my back and health. And then you come up with this wonderful idea of the unknown and the absolute, and I latch onto it because it seems like the solution to all my problems, and I want to get it. You know, the trouble is that I think that in this movement of where I am to trying to go to that idea of what is the absolute, I create another problem for myself. I create the spiritual seeker's problem. It's not the problem of most people who don't care about any of this. They have other problems to deal with, but the spiritual seeker has created this this other issue, this other problem, you know. And Krishnamurti, I think, and other people, the pointer to them is they say, yes, yes, yes. But now, you know, like the difficult thing is, do you put yourself in the position of the person who is the seeker? Or if you are realized and you have the realization, then you speak from the perspective of a realized soul, one with Brahman or a Buddha and so on. It's problematic if you do that. If you say, oh, I'm a realized person, and let me tell you the way it really is. I'm telling you my truth. Everything's fine from my perspective. People get angry if you do that. They just feel like you're trying to lord it over them as an enlightened being, and you're just deluded, and so on and so forth. The message of your teaching is probably not going to come across unless you have the right aura about you that people go, oh yes, that guy's Krishnamurti, or that was, you know, Sadhguru or Bunji or whoever it is, and they've given you the status of being a realized person. The other issue is you can put yourself in the position of the seeker, you know, which is to say, hey, because does it really matter? You know, like from the position of someone who doesn't know, what do I do? I think Krishnamurti does that. He tells us, look, start with the reality of what you're experiencing, which is the state of consciousness that is manifesting in you. It is conditioned consciousness that is revealing itself to you all the time. The known is revealing itself. The unknown is always there. In some sense, you could say it's the ground from which everything comes. But what you are able to know or see is that which can be spoken of, that which can be observed, right? The unknown, to some extent, it seems that all the teachers tell us this, let me just, you know, is that it's unknowable. There are no words for it. There's no you to be there experiencing it. It is the fundament from which everything emerges. So in the realm of the relative, there's only you and the stuff that you're observing, the pain, the anxiety, the iceberg and its creation. And Krishnamurti says, start there. That's actually enough. Because as you said, that's not different from the absolute, right? There is no duality in the part. There is no duality in the conditioned manifestation, if that makes any sense. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Hilary. We'll take other questions. Yes, Dr. Harshad Parekh.
Yes, are you able to hear my voice?
Yeah.
Thank you, Hilary. It is very, very interesting to listen to you and speaking in such a very, very clear voice and clarity. What I like to say is that a student in the school assembly, they sing certain bhajans which says Nitya Akhanda Ananta Anadi Purna Brahma Sanatan, and then Nirakar Nirgun to Ishwar. So all this something, I don't know anything about this thing, whether it is imagination, all this, that there is something eternal there and unbroken, no end, no beginning, and the whole Brahman, and which has no characteristic, no no qualities. So it's a possibility, there's a possibility of being silent. And it is like if you are in an empty room and your eyes are fully open, somebody enters. So similarly, this mind, which can be empty, silent, and in that, even that thinking doesn't do any harm to you, it doesn't multiply, as long as this awareness, silent awareness exists. But in the absence of this awareness, silent awareness, our thoughts can multiply and create many undesirable qualities like anger, fear, jealousy, loneliness. And another thing which I like to say is that sometimes Krishnaji talks about moving with what is. And that is also I can understand that thinking is like a stream which goes on, but out of that stream, when there's a branch comes, which we call the thinker or I or me or self, then there is a duality between thinker and thought. And then that creates many people go on with, and it can be seen clearly, there are no problem. And that what I would consider a kind of freedom from the known. There is.
Mr. Bhai, your voice is breaking and sometimes there is no voice at all. Problem with your audio.
We seem to have lost him.
We lost him. I think we'll hear him later. We'll go to Dr. Pradeep Verma. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I am audible, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Professor. Embracing the unknown, embracing the unknown, it means for me, accepting the unknown willingly. One of the main reasons behind conflict in human beings is comparison and judgment by the self, invariably based on the convictions, belief system, faith, and even likings. JK warned us enough about comparison, and we started comparing him with Buddha and the other contemporary thinkers and seers. You see, another point is that truth and what is always changing. How long we'll go on comparing? Then another point is life tree is so heavily branched that one can see only few of the branches and rarely the connecting stem and the root or the source. For passing examinations in academics, comparisons is definitely has a place. You see, what we are comparing is the knowns, and what is always attracting us is the unknown. We start with knowledge and get trapped in it. What we are doing will always matter more than any other knowledge and memory or what someone said. Another point I wanted was when we use the word beyond, there is connectivity with the known. It's not. So these are some of the things. And absolute reality you were talking about and quoting some Upanishad, that it is different from the known as well as the unknown. Might be he's hinting at the limitedness of the mind, because both these knowns and unknowns is a part of mind, I believe. So that may be the thing. Thank you very much for giving me time. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. That I appreciate very much your contributions there. I think I think you're spot on. I feel my own understanding of that is the idea of the known and the idea of the unknown exist in a relationship to each other. They're just concepts that one wants, to some extent, the seeing of that is a freedom from getting caught in these two notions. Otherwise, one tries to abide in the unknown, get to the unknown, free oneself from the known, and this is a generation of more conflict, the very source. So I do believe this is what is being pointed to, and in this lies that the paradox of spiritual teachings, right? They have to use words and language to communicate, because one can sit in silence, as some groups do, and if we all just gathered here silently, not speaking to each other, there would be probably no confusion, except in our own heads. If we were silent in our own heads, maybe there would be no confusion. But the moment you open your mouth to say something, you use a word, the word crystallizes reality into something, and somebody else will take objection to your word, because the word is just a pointer to something. Even if you say absolute, someone says, well, what? Don't you mean the relative? And like, no. For everything, there is its opposite, its other side. And the mind seems to love to duel with those categories constantly. To see this play in action, to see the nature of the mind, and to recognize it as a playful creativity is actually quite interesting, because the mind is, the relative mind is an extraordinary instrument, capable of wonderful things. To get caught in it and to be gobbled up by it, to be hurt by, this is the problem. Our problem is where some aspect of ourselves is hurting our own capacity to engage with life with wisdom, compassion, freedom, joy, beauty, appreciation of beauty, and so on. Anyhow, thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Henry. Professor Krishna, yes, sir.
I need to unmute myself.
Sir, you are unmuted already. We can hear you.
Okay. Excellent talk, Hilary. Very profound, and from several sources. So thank you. I have a sort of scientific background. So I like to reduce the problem when it becomes too difficult, and first solve the simpler problem. We do that in mathematics and in physics and so on. Now, the spiritual problems you have referred to are quite intractable, as you yourself pointed out. It's just too confusing to enter into that. But one can begin with simpler problem of how does the human mind make any discovery beyond the known in any field, in science, in art, in music. How does it come upon something totally new, which was not known before? Which is what Krishnamurti calls an insight. Of course, when it is in a particular field, he calls it a partial insight, but a partial insight has the same quality as a more holistic insight, though it may be limited to that particular issue or that particular question, not covering the whole of consciousness as what was the concern of Krishnamurti. He talked about creative consciousness, which is freed completely from the past. Not freed does not mean the ending of the past, but no domination of the past, so that one is relatively free from it. So coming back to my field, which I know more clearly, how did Einstein discover that space and time are not independent of each other? It had been assumed to be true right from the time of Newton, or perhaps even before. But at least 300-400 years, or 300-400 years, nobody had questioned that. It was not in Einstein's training. He was trained in classical physics, which always assumed that space and time are independent of each other. So how did he come upon the discovery that no, they are not independent from each other? The only sources he had were that not everything was fitting. He was not able to explain everything from just the assumptions of classical physics. So he knew that somewhere some assumption must be false. Otherwise, you would mean that the universe is not logically explainable, which is that is a much bigger question for a scientist. So he started questioning by doing thought experiments, that if I was traveling on a light beam, how would the universe appear to me? And so on. And suddenly he had this flash of insight that space and time are not independent of each other, but they appear so to us because we never travel with very high velocities compared with light. And now we know that as the theory of relativity and all that. So it changed our whole concept of space and time and brought in the 4-dimensional continuum and things like that. So the entire worldview changed because of that perception. Now, my question is, which is related to today's talk. He started with the known, but he questioned. And he questioned particularly the assumptions. And somehow, there is this mysterious capacity in the human mind to make a foray into the unknown, pick up something that is true from there, and bring it into the field of the known. Then, of course, it's a question of how do you describe it? And the scientist uses mathematics or language and so on, logic, to explain that. But the mysterious part is, how does the mind go from the known? The question comes from the known. But the answer doesn't come from the known. The answer comes from the unknown. Now, this is mysterious, but the human mind is capable of it. The computer is not. The computer completely tied down to the known. So, is Krishnaji asking us to have similar insights in life about all our problems? In which case, there are many, many illusions. And you need an insight to drop an illusion. And that's what the Buddhist approach was. That neti neti means it is not this, it is not that. So you drop the false, and your mind gets clearer and clearer, which is how you grow in wisdom. Of course, Krishnaji denied that slow process of growth. He said, jump to it. But that jump is an insight, and you could possibly get the big insight in one go, because it's not a linear phenomenon. But there is not one illusion in the mind. There are thousands of illusions in your brought about by the knowledge, which is the conditioning. which is dependent on where you were born and brought up and so on, culture. So if you can drop one illusion, potentially you are capable of dropping all illusion, which tells you that I have the capacity to go beyond the known. Chronological time is inevitable. As you pointed out, the psychological time is not there. So it is not that you come closer to the truth as you go on. You are in a different prison, that's all. You go from one prison or one illusion to another illusion, and you have this feeling of progress. But certainly the clarity in the mind increases. But there are deeper and deeper illusions, and you may not get to the deepest illusion of being one with the whole universe and things like that, or being a separate individual. That's how it appears to me. I mean, since Dubeji asked me to comment on your talk.
Please, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Prasad Garu, would you like to say something? Yeah.
Who is Dinesh has had a hand? Oh, well, your hand is just up from before.
We'll come to Dinesh after Prasad Garu. Yes.
Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Thank you, Professor Hillary, for your excellent, very clear exposition of the spiritual quest with all the masters. And particularly, I liked that statement. Absolute reality is different from both the known and the unknown. Normally, we think the unknown is the absolute reality. At least readers of Krishnamurti tend to think that way, because he doesn't go beyond the unknown. Actually, he doesn't describe the unknown. He leaves the unknown to your discovery. You have to discover the unknown. And he doesn't go beyond that. Actually, I don't think, the main contribution of Krishnamurti is he has cleared a lot of rubbish, a lot of illusions. I was reading your lecture somewhere yesterday night, and you referred to the many illusions in the Hindu pantheon. The entire pantheon is an illusion. At least that is my understanding of case stand on that. And he doesn't waste much time in clearing that rubbish. He simply calls it all inventions of your mind. And for him, one invention is as bad as the other. There are no degrees of merit in those inventions. All inventions, for him, the main stand is so long as you live in the field of the operations of the mind, which is thought, you are caught, you are conditioned. You cannot go beyond, you cannot reach the other shore. And we are all caught in the field of thought. Our universities specialize in that because they train us in thought, various disciplines. And similarly, another thing is the illusion of individuality. We all have, we grow up with that illusion of individuality, that I am an individual. I have my own convictions, my own traditions, my own beliefs, my own philosophies, my own political ideologies, all these things. This is the main factor that prevents you from going beyond the norm. For him, human consciousness is one. He doesn't subscribe to the idea that you are an individual. Individual is one, according to him, who is indivisible. We are all divisible creatures. We are all divided creatures by religion, by language, by culture, by so many things. We are all divided. For him, the undivided status is the reality. So, and another illusion we have is that we can try to reach the unknown. We attempt, as you have said, sir, we attempt by so many methods, by disciplines, by yoga, by meditation, by so many practices. All these things are, they never take you closer to the unknown. I am not using the word truth because normally he doesn't use the word truth. He uses the word only unknown. And I think he's very close to the Hindu main planks. But he doesn't want us to waste time on vague ideations. He doesn't want us, for example, he says all human consciousness is one. But I was listening to discovery by, a video by a professor who is also a follower of Krishnamurti, Dr. I'm not getting his name. He says, awareness is common. Consciousness is species specific. That is, every species may have its own consciousness, like dogs have a particular consciousness, cats, crows, like that. But awareness is something common. But Krishnamurti doesn't go to that extent in his talks. He simply says, human consciousness is all one. He stops there, not because he does not believe in the Brahman, as the Hindus do, but because he thinks that is not required for us. For us, what is required is to realize that we are not individuals, to realize that we are caught up in the network of thought. He stops with what is useful for us. He doesn't go beyond what is useful for human transformation. Thank you, sir. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just interject a bit there. I'd like to take what you said and tie it a bit into what Dr. Krishna had said on insights and so on. Yeah, you're quite right. Krishnamurti doesn't spend a lot of time talking about what might be. He tells us to start with what is, the relative, and so on. In a way, Krishna, you were talking about what is it that leads to this quality of insight from which true creativity emerges and so on. Just now I was thinking, Newton is like, there's the story of him watching the apple fall. we don't know if he actually saw an apple fall. This is just a story about him observing the processes of gravity. But you could say that for 2,000 years before, people have seen apples fall, but didn't observe and watch this process of gravitation with the quality of, you could say, true observation that gave Newton the insight into the mechanisms through which the moon moves around the earth and so on. So he saw his insight in observing that which all of us are seeing constantly around us was different. In other words, it's the same reality, but it allowed him to penetrate by observing what is apple falling and have a deeper insight into a hidden and unknown mechanism of the movement of the celestial spheres in the cosmos. Krishnamurti is, I think, pointing us to something like that. He is saying, watch the apple fall from the tree. Watch what is going on in your head and what's going on around you at this very moment. Watch the relative, the particular, the conditioned aspect of reality. And if you watched it with the quality of sensitivity and love, let me use that word love, because he says, when you love something, you pay attention to it. You must love the world. You must love your conditioning. You must love, you must, I mean, I don't want to make it into something that's causing you stress about something, but when there is, you pay attention to something when it is a delight to you, when so if you fall in love with the world, you will pay attention to each manifestation that arises in consciousness. And that might give you an insight to the mechanism through which the unknown is constantly becoming the known. Out of the unknown, the known seems to emerge, So the laws that govern our world, the unknown secrets of the universe, if you like, are constantly unfolding in front of us mysteriously and magically all the time. To those who have the eyes to see it and the ears to hear it, we will see that process occur. But it requires a quality of care, of love, of attention, of sensitivity that makes us not want to move away from the moment, because the moment is precious. It has a quality of beauty. It has a quality of fullness. It has a power as it reveals itself. It reveals its truth to us constantly at this moment. That is, I think, Krishnamurti trying to tell us, don't try to go. I mean, as you were saying, our escape is a way into something far more limited, something far more uninteresting, a construction of our own thinking. That is our most often bit of our problem. Our problem is an escape into the mundane, an escape into the crystallized creations of our thinking minds, when what is available to us constantly is the extraordinary unfolding of an immeasurable truth, inexpressible, and a delight, really, in some sense. So I think this is why Krishnamurti doesn't want to talk about that. He points us to the moment, to what is knowable, what is known, and urges us with this quality of urgency to be aware of it, to watch it unfold.
Thank you. We have just 6 minutes, so I don't think I can take so many questions. I'll request the questioners to please ask the question very briefly, and maybe we can take 1 or 2 more. Yes, Dinesh ji, please go ahead.
Sir, I want your views on 2 things. One is, unknown has come to you, you cannot go to unknown. That's what Krishnamurti said, and almost all literature are saying the same thing. That unknown dimension or timeless dimension has to come to you. Number one. Number two, what are your views on method versus no method? Na iti versus iti. Because in iti they say that whatever the words you are given or whatever name you are given to anything, that thing and the name, both are energies, and the same energy is available with both. So whether you take name, then also you can reach to the energy of the actual thing or the beyond thing. What do you have to say?
I think, I mean, yeah, there's a passive quality to this. As long as the self is acting, it is, the action of the self is a manifestation of this very process of the unknown becoming the known. The I is the agent of creation. The I is, I mean, it is, if there's a source, if there is an energy source from which creation comes about, you can say the crystallization of that is the I in its doing. So to know the source, the I must not be. So, and to some extent, there's a quality of passivity. The I disappears, the self disappears for the unknown to exist. Or you could say that the self dissolves away in the so there's almost all mystics, all teachers talk about the absence of the self, a passive quality with which it comes to you rather than you doing. You cannot get to the unknown. The unknown reveals itself. It reveals itself to whom? I don't know. It doesn't. It reveals. There's a revelation of it. The self arises within that. And I'm sorry, your other question was to do with oh, you're muted.
Other question was methods versus no method. This iti versus no iti.
Methods. I mean, so method is done by a doer. Again, from the perspective of the absolute, method or no method, these are not. This is the mind creating a duality. And so it's like oh, when I realized that there's no time, but up until then there was time for me to get there, and I prayed my practices. But when you get there, people go, none of what I did really was the cause of what happened to me. Like, oh, I got realized, but really nothing that I did up to this moment of realization was actually the cause of the realization. So, but then was it or was it not? Well, everything you did, how can you negate that? You did something. But the realization often is that did not bring this about. This thing that was brought about was always there. You are taking power, you're taking agency for something that you don't have agency over. It's like saying, I caused myself to be born. I didn't. I mean, I was here one day and there was consciousness. I would love to say that I did something back there that made me happen, but that would be my ego pretending that I had brought myself to be, So in the same way, if you're honest with yourself, realization is not something that lends itself to method. Maybe all methods are necessary to reveal the futility of method. Krishnamurti uses the analogy of the guy polishing the rock and trying to make a mirror, and the master says, look, this will never turn into a mirror, but you need to polish some rocks before you come to that realization yourself. So maybe method is something you do to be able to relinquish methods, to release methods, to give it up.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have come to the end of the talk. It's quite late for Hillary. It's 1 a.m. in Ontario, so we'll not delay anymore. I'm sorry we can't take any more questions from Dr. Pradeep Verma and Ravi Kaushal. Maybe next time. So I want to thank Hillary for being with us. Thanks a lot. It was very, very interesting talk. Maybe when your academic work is a little less, we'll invite you one more time to, or many more times to come and talk to us. Thanks a lot. And next Sunday, we'll have Mr. Prasad Mulupuri talking to us on the common ground of humanity. So it will be next Sunday at 11 a.m. And once again, I want to thank Hillary for being with us and sparing your time at such an odd hour. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all. It was wonderful being with you. It was good seeing everybody who I didn't say hello to. Ravi, I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to ask a question, but you have my email. You can always send me a question if you desire, or if you want to share something. All the best to everyone.
Thank you.
Krishna, great seeing you. Shripati, all the rest.
Thank you.
Good night, sir.
Until next time. Bye-bye.
End it, please. End it now.